Welcome to Casual Friday. Well, it is good to be back in Minnesota. This is my first almost full week in my house since the end of March, beginning of April. It's been one trip after another, and I was exhausted by the end of it. So last week we were in Boston because our youngest daughter graduated from college. Well, she actually graduated in December, and she's been living back at home with us for a few months. But commencement was last week. They only do commencement once a week there. So she's been living with us for the past 4 months, and we had just spent a week with her visiting her older sister in the Netherlands. So she flew back from the Netherlands right to Boston, and then we flew back to Boston a few days after we returned from the Netherlands. We didn't spend a whole lot of time with her because, like I said, we've been living with her for the past four. She's been living with us for the past 4 months, and she'd been away from her friends for those 4 months, and this was it in terms of everybody is going off in their own directions. So she was spending most of her time with them. And so we did. On Thursday was her college commencement. She graduated from the College of, I think it's Art, Media, and Design. They call it KMD. And so that was the college graduation where she actually got to walk up on the stage and have her name announced and shake the hand of the dean and all of that. It's a much smaller grouping. And we did not go to the big university commencement the next day. She went because all of her other friends were going to be there, but we didn't go to that. So she had recommended to us that, if you guys need something to do, maybe you can go to the Boston Public Library. And I mean, I like libraries, but I'm like, why would we go to the library? And she said, well, it's right across the street from the hotel. And she said, it's a historic building. There's all this famous artwork in there or artwork done by famous artists in there. And it's a really interesting building. I think you'd find it fun to go to. So we were on a pretty high floor as well. So we could look right down onto the library, and then there was a church across the street from it, so a couple blocks away that direction, and another church off in to the right. And so I was looking up those churches. They're old churches in terms of they were founded back in the 1600s. Those buildings are not from the 1600s though. So I was reading up on the history of that because that's something I am interested in. So we did spend some time going into the library, and it was amazing. It's very ornate. It was built in the very end of the 1890s and very ornate, and has a really cool reference library that reminded me of the law library at the University of Michigan, where it has the little green lamps on the desks. And they called it a reference library, this particular room that we were looking through. And it looked to me like it was a law library. There were a lot of books about the law, about U.S. law on the shelves, including bound copies of all of the, I think they're the federal laws that Congress made, going all the way back to the beginning. And there's a particular volume that was labeled, and somebody had written on the in handwriting on the binding that it was Indian treaties. And so it was a really cool experience. I'm glad she suggested it because I don't know that we would have gone in there otherwise. One of the things that really disappointed me though was that we were going to miss this exhibition. They have a map room there, and they had a couple of big maps, early maps of the United States, when a lot of it was still territory. So it was sort of like a timeline of maps. And they had two really early ones out there in the hallway. And then the map room itself was closed because they were getting the exhibition set up, and it was going to open that very next day when we were leaving. And I was super disappointed because it looked like it was going to be really interesting. Was another cool thing about that building, though, is there was a new addition built on the back end of it in the 1970s. This completely different in architectural style. But in both sections, the old section and the new section, they have cafes. Like they had the map room cafe was in the old building, and it's really cool looking. And you could get, I think it's a bar even, like you could get a drink and something to eat in there. And then on the news side, they had a cafe as well. It was much more open air, lots of windows. And the WGBH public radio station has a corner of it where people could sit and watch live broadcasting. They don't broadcast live from there all day, but one of the times we were in there, there was something going on in the morning, and they were interviewing. There's 3 people talking, and they have cameras set up too. And there are all these people in the cafe that were just watching the public broadcasting radio network do their morning show. So that was kind of cool as well. So the university that my daughter went to is called Northeastern, and it's in an area of Boston called the Back Bay. And I remember when we moved her in, I didn't really understand why that was called the Back Bay. I'm like, where's the Back Bay? Why is this called the Back Bay neighborhood? And the reason is I couldn't see any bays because the neighborhood used to be the bay. So in the 19th century, they started filling it in, putting landfill in, and they've, basically, I think they doubled the size of the city of Boston. So there was this big fire in Boston in the financial and commercial area in 1872, and it basically burned down the entire commercial district, and including 2 churches. One was Trinity Church and the other was Old South Church. And when they rebuilt in Back Bay, right in the neighborhood where our hotel was. And those were the 2 churches that we could see that were across from the library. So the churches, one of them is celebrating its 350th anniversary, but it's the church, not that building that's 350 years old. So I was looking into that fire to find out, what was going on, like what happened. And it was kind of interesting. So like a lot of construction in the United States, the buildings were made of stone, but the framing was in wood, and a lot of the roofs and the upper areas were made from wood. And because it was a commercial area, a lot of the businesses stored inventory up in the attics because the tax law was that they didn't get taxed on inventory that was held in the attic. So which is kind of interesting to see how people get around these tax laws. Like in the Netherlands, it was if you had the building on the canal, they taxed you based on how wide it was. So they'd make these narrow houses that were really deep, or however many windows you had on the front of the house, they would tax you based on that. And so people would put the door on the side facing away from the canal and claim that was the front of the house. And so Boston, people were doing the same sort of thing. And so the goods that they were storing in the attics were dry goods and highly flammable. And the roofs were often had wood. And the fire hoses didn't have very good pressure because they were old pipes, and they could not get enough pressure to shoot up to the tallest buildings. And so that meant that the fires could jump from roof to roof. And it just completely destroyed this whole financial area. But the other thing that business owners did was over-insured their businesses. So they didn't have any trouble getting enough money to rebuild. And when they rebuilt, they widened the streets and they kind of straightened some of them out. And the city came back within just a couple of years. But these 2 churches that burned down decided to relocate in the Back Bay neighborhood. And so they were really beautiful buildings. They were built in, I think they were built in the early 1880s maybe. And I just love the Boston architecture because there's a real mixture of new and old. And I just love walking through the streets because we really don't have that here in Minnesota. Our oldest buildings, will have a few buildings here or there that might be 100 years old, but we don't have the kind of history that Boston has. So I always enjoy walking around the streets there. So while I was in Boston, I started a new knitting project, and it was with yarn that I bought in the Netherlands. I think I showed you the shop front of the place where I bought yarn, but I forgot to show you the yarn that I bought. And so I'm going to do that now. I like to buy sock yarn when I'm on vacation because it packs small. So I bought 2 balls of yarn. I wanted to buy a yarn that I hadn't seen before here. So I'm not going to buy the same yarn I could get at a yarn shop 2 miles from my house. So I bought yarn from a company, or the shop owner told me it was an Austrian yarn called FERNER WOLLE. And it's Lungauer Sockenwolle 6-fox. So it's a 6-ply yarn, kind of sport weight. I'm thinking not quite into the double knitting, but a sport weight yarn. And I got 2 colorways. I got one that I liked, which is kind of got a turquoise and kind of a purple. And then there's some sections that are black and white, like the fake Fair Isle stuff. So that one I bought for myself, but my daughters were with me, and my older one, the one that lives in the Netherlands, she picked out this color, and this isn't a color I would have chosen for myself, but she's chosen things similar to this before, so it didn't really surprise me. This one has got some tan and brown, and then a couple of different shades of blue. And I wanted to know how it was going to knit up, how it was going to stripe. So I was looking it up online, and I couldn't find this colorway. It took me a while to find this colorway anywhere. Nobody on Ravelry has knit this up that I could find in this colorway. But I did find like an advertisement for this brand, and with a little poster that had the different colorways knit up into socks. And so then I could see. So I finished the first sock. And here's how the colorway runs. So dark blue, medium blue, light blue, and then the blue and the tan sections are separated with these black and white areas. And then the blue goes in reverse, light blue, dark blue, or medium blue, dark blue. And then you get the black and white. And then you get the tan, and it's kind of interesting. It's light tan, a big section of the brown, and then a light tan again. So I never know, like, from the starting point where I am, where I'm going to be when it's time to knit the heel, and then therefore what kind of heel do I want to knit. In the past year or so, I've been doing a lot of peasant heels once I figured out how to get them to fit right. And by doing that allows me to keep the colorway sequence exactly the way it appears in the ball. So one of the challenges I had was then, well, what was I going to do for the heel? Because when I got to the bottom of the leg, I was just, it just started this light color tan. And what I decided to do was to wind off into another section that started with the tan, and then work toward the heel. So the back side of the heel has a little bit longer section of the light tan, and then it goes into the dark. But so that was my decision for that. And I think it's all right. I like it. I couldn't really figure out what else I would want to do. And I had plenty of yarn because it's for a foot that's very close to my size. Like when I knit for my brother, I would be using most, if not all, of the yarn in a ball this size. But I had plenty of yarn to wind off and make a decision about what color I wanted to use. And that seemed to work out. So I'm just about at the toes of the second sock, and I need to do the heel. What I usually do with the peasant heel is I stop at the point where I think the toes are going to begin. Then I pick up the stitches for the heel and knit the heel. And then if it's a sock for me, I try it on and I see if I'm ready to begin the toes or not. If it's for somebody else, I have one of those. I'll show you. So if it's for another person, I stick one of these in, and it allows me to measure from the heel to the toe point exactly how long the sock is. This is from, it's called the Sock Ruler from sockruler.com. And it works pretty well. So I thought it was kind of a gimmicky, but this actually does help me when I'm knitting socks for other people, because I find it hard to measure from the start of the heel up to where the toe is. It's just, I find that tricky, and I thought, well, maybe this will help. And I I think it does. So I promised to show you a photo of my daughter wearing the Edwardian sweater once I got the buttons on. She was not here long enough for me to, I had her try it on. I had her tell me where she wanted the buttons, but I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do it yet. What I'm going to do I want to create some kind of loop that will go around those buttons on the neck. She wanted 2 buttons, not 1. So she didn't take the sweater with her. She's not going to be able to wear it right away. So I will be doing something with it the next couple of weeks. And then when we go down to visit her in Chicago, after she's all settled, I'll take it with me and have her try it on. But I did wash it. And a number of people had asked about how was I planning on washing and blocking. And I hadn't even thought about it. I didn't really put any thought into that because I didn't think I would need to do anything different than I would ever do once a sweater's completed. And so I filled up a sink with warm water and some wool wash, let it soak for, I don't know, an hour or something like that, drain the water out. We have an old top loading washing machine. I just use that to spin the extra out. And I just laid it down and I put a fan on it to help dry it a little bit. But I didn't try to block it to a specific size because with this fabric, the accordion nature of it, there's not really a way. I'm not stretching it or forming it or trying to make it line up exactly. I just laid it on I have this mat that I dry things on. I just laid it on there and made sure it wasn't stretched out too much and let it dry. So that will soften it up and give it a little bit more drape for wearing. But what I wanted to mention was that this weekend I will be at Shepherd's Harvest, which is the local fiber festival here in Minnesota. It's in Lake Elmo at the Washington County Fairgrounds, right near Stillwater. And the Minnesota Knitters Guild has a booth there, and we have volunteers that take different shifts. I'll be at the booth on Saturday from 1:15 to 3:45. So if you are coming to Shepherd's Harvest, you can stop by and say hi. But in particular, they always want to encourage us to bring projects that we've knit to sort of entice people to come over. So one of the things I'm planning to bring is the sweater. So if you wanted to see it in person, you're welcome to come by, stop by and see it. And I'll probably be working on what to do about the buttons this weekend. So you might get to see it with the buttons. I don't know. We'll find out. So now that summer is approaching, I tend to not work on sweater projects as much because they tend to get heavy on me, and I'm not thinking about keeping myself warm and what kind of sweater do I want, but I do have a couple of sweater projects that I'm thinking about, and I haven't quite settled on one of them. But there is a sweater that I wear a lot in my videos, and the reason I wear it a lot in the videos is because I wear it a lot all the time, and I don't pay attention to whether I've just recently worn that in a video. So it's this sweater, the one that's kind of two-tone gray, and it has the cables up the front. And while we were in Boston, we were walking to a restaurant, and I had a raincoat, and my daughter did not. She had met us after commencement. She didn't have a jacket with her. So I said, well, do you want to wear this sweater? And so she put it on the way to the restaurant. And it was really interesting for me to see the sweater on another body, because seeing it on my own, I can't really get that kind of 360 perspective. And I said, well, it looks nice on you. Actually, it is a nice sweater. And she said, yeah, I like having a nice oversized sweater. And I said, it's not oversized on me. She's not that much smaller than I am. I mean, no, I'm not that much bigger than she is. But she liked it. And she's going to be working in an office environment that's going to have air conditioning in the summer, and it might be chilly in the winter. And I said, would you like a sweater like this? And because she thought it was a nice sweater. And she said, well, I would, but I'd want it more cropped and I'd want it in cream color. She wouldn't want a two-tone. And I actually want another one of these sweaters for myself that's maybe a little longer than this one. Just kind of hits me at mid-hip, which is a good length in some respects, and in other respects I would like one that was a little bit longer. So I'm thinking about re-knitting this sweater. There's no pattern for it. It's something I designed myself over a period of years, and I would like to knit it up again and then see if I can figure out how to grade it. So I don't have any problem knitting for a specific person, but I've never tried grading a sweater to multiple sizes, particularly not into a large range of sizes, like from really small to like 2 or 3 XL or larger. I just don't have a sense on how the grading changes. So it would be a learning process for me. But I get a lot of comments on this sweater, people wanting to know what it is and is the pattern available, to the point where I feel like, I really should see about turning this into a pattern. So I'm thinking that that is what I'm going to be doing in part over the next few months, is figuring out how to turn this into a sweater pattern that other people could knit. I also want to knit another vintage sweater. And so my plan has been that I would do one from each decade, because I really kind of want to see how the constructions evolve. I want to experience it. I bought a book called Centenary Stitches back in like December, January, and the patterns in there were sweaters that were knit from vintage patterns that were sort of translated into modern terms, or that were created by looking at a photograph. And it was this film that was a documentary, a recreation about this village where these two men who had served in World War I were from. And so there was a lot of knitwear in that movie, and there were knitters from all over the world who helped create these items. But this book has sort of translated the vintage or antique patterns into current day patterns, and then graded them to multiple sizes, and then recommending the correct needle sizes, all kinds of things like what you'd expect from a modern pattern, because these old patterns usually were written with one size. And sometimes they would tell you, if you wanted to make it bigger or larger, how many stitches that you would need to remove or add. But most of the time they didn't. And they didn't necessarily tell you how long to knit something. They'd say how many repeats of a pattern to knit, and till then do this and then do that. So they do have a sweater of a type that I'm interested in knitting, but it would sort of take the fun out of it for me, of experiencing the vintage pattern. And the type of sweater I'm interested in is called a Tuxedo Sweater. And I'm trying to find out more information about what this phenomenon was about. It's very easy for me to find these sweaters in the 1920s. I can find newspaper ads advertising completed sweaters in this style. And I can find some in the 1910s, starting at right around World War I. And I'm not sure what it was that caused this style of pattern to become popular. But a lot of the ones that I'm seeing from the 1910s are not, I don't really like. I want to make something that I'd want to wear, and a lot of them are in garter stitch. So what it makes it a tuxedo sweater is that the front opens. It's like a cardigan, but it's not buttoned. And the two sides have edgings that kind of flip over and become the collar. So it looks like the front of a tuxedo. So one thing I'd read was that tuxedos, the look of the tuxedo had become very popular. And so I think that this tuxedo sweater was related to that in some way. I'm just not sure. But I am finding tons of patterns from the 1920s that are tuxedo or otherwise that I really like. Like, I really like the fashion sensibility of the 1920s. There are a lot of things that I look at and go, ooh, that's really cool. I'd love to knit that, and I'd love to wear that. Not so much the World War I era. And so I'm really struggling to find a tuxedo sweater pattern that is knit. I'm finding crocheted ones that I like better than the knitted ones. And I'm not much of a crocheter, and normally I don't like crochet as much as I like knitting. So it's kind of interesting to me to see that these patterns, I'm preferring the crocheted versions to the knitted ones. But one of the companies that I found that make patterns that I really like, at least from the 1920s, was called Corticelli, is assume how you would pronounce it. It was a company on the East Coast of the United States. It was a silk company. And then they also came out with, so they made silk threads, like embroidery threads, and then they also produced yarns. And then somewhere in the early 1920s, rayon was developed as artificial silk or art silk. And some of their yarns include a combination of this artificial silk and wool. And so there's a pattern from the 1920s, a Corticelli pattern, a couple of them that I really love and I want to knit at some point. But first, I really want to find a pattern from the 1910s, preferably a tuxedo sweater. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I could wait until I get to the 20s to do a tuxedo sweater, but I'd really like to find one that I liked and not just one that exists. So that's kind of in my mind for the summer. Somebody mentioned in the comments a week or so ago that there was another YouTuber who goes by Curiosity Inc. and that he had found a bunch of vintage knitting patterns up in this attic. And I knew exactly who she was talking about. I hadn't seen that episode. It had just come out, I think, the day before. And it's this guy who he has an antique store, and he goes around and he, you know, looks for things to sell, and he sells some things online, but he has a physical store as well. And one of his viewers had alerted him to this house that he's Canadian. So it's like a house 3 hours away, 2.5, 3 hours away from where he lives. And it was a house that was either going to be demolished or burned down. The children of the owner was 102 years old, and she'd been in a nursing home for a few years. And her kids, she never had thrown anything out. She was a fairly famous potter artist, and she had lived there for, I think, 50 years, something like that. And the kids just didn't want to deal with all of clearing all the stuff out. So they were either going to just demolish it or have it burned down. And they contacted him and said, you know, do you want to come look and see if there's anything here that you would want? And so he was, you know, videotaping as he went there and, you know, the struggle to try to get through the house and find things. And he turned out at the end of that first video, he said, I bought the house. And so that was, he likes having projects. So he'll have like an old car that he'll restore and sell, or he just really likes having a project like that. So in the past 4 months, he's had the house listed as a historic landmark because the woman is a famous Canadian potter. He gradually, you know, cleared out trash from there, but there was a lot of stuff that was vintage, antique, or just in good condition, brand new even. And so he donated some things like clothing to the local area. The vintage stuff he took back to his shop. He found tons of her ceramics, which are worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And he found furniture and things, and he got these woodworkers in, and they remodeled the house, and they were upcycling materials that were stored in the house and reusing things. They put in new windows and stuff, but in the existing frames. And he's really done an amazing job. But every episode, he's like, you know, we never had looked in this particular cupboard, and then he'd find more stuff in there. And so this week or so ago, he was going through some boxes that were still in the attic that he hadn't gone through, and there were these vintage patterns. So I emailed him and asked him if they were still available, and if they were, how much did he want from it. I haven't heard back from him because they're getting ready to do an open house. I assume he's just behind on his emails. I'm going to nudge him again because I'd really like to get a hold of those because it's exactly the era that I'm looking for. So keep my fingers crossed that I can buy those patterns from him. And maybe there will be a tuxedo sweater in that pile that I will want to knit. And then one other thing I'm probably going to start this weekend is I cleaned my office this week. It got to the point I could hardly stand to walk in here because I was like, oh, it's just so bad. So I cleaned my office and I found this pillow form in my office. I don't remember why I bought this. I know it's been I know I've had it for a number of years. I don't know why I bought it. And I mentioned a few months ago that I have no desire to knit pillow coverings. It's not my thing. But my daughter, who moved to Chicago, she is a designer, graphic designer, so she has much more of an aesthetic sense and an idea of what she wants her a vision of what she wants her bedroom to look like. So I said, I found this pillow form. Would you like me to knit you something, a cover for it? And she's like, oh yeah, that would be great. So this is what's interesting about knitting for her now versus knitting for my kids when they were in high school. When we were in the Netherlands, we were walking by, I don't remember if it was Rotterdam or Amsterdam, we walked by a hair salon, and there was a little table and a couple chairs outside of the salon, and one of the chairs had a cushion on it that was knitted. And I took a picture of it because I thought, ooh, knitting in the wild. So I showed her that picture. And what it was mostly stockinette. And then every so often there was a row of purl. So it wasn't garter stitch. It was stockinette with, a row of purl. It was very simple. And that seemed like it would be to her taste. And she goes, oh yeah, I do like that. But I could buy that. I would want you to make something that I wouldn't be able to buy. And that's completely different from when the kids were in high school, when they would find something from Urban Outfitters and they'd say, I want you to make me this exact thing, but I want you to make it for me in a different color or a different fiber or something like that. They wanted, if they would have been happy if I had found a label that said Urban Outfitters on it that I could have sewn on too. But there was hats and maybe socks they would accept from me, and gloves or mittens, but they certainly didn't want a sweater from me. So this has been kind of interesting to see that, she wants something that's sort of not too busy, but that's interesting and not something that she would be able to find in the store. So we found a pattern and I'm going to get started on. It's one of these things where it's rated as easy, and it is, but I'm looking at how it's constructed. It's constructed in 2 squares, and then you seam it up all the way around. And I thought, well, that's dumb. Why wouldn't I just do a closed cast on like you do for a toe, but that would be the width of the pillow, and then knit it in the round, and then I could graft it shut at the top. And it's a lot more complicated to do that and to figure out. And plus the yarn I'm using is thinner and the pillow is smaller, and so the stitch counts are not the same. And so I'm having to do a lot of redesign as it is. And I finally decided I'm just going to knit it the way the instructions say and just make the gauge differences, because I think those seams actually might help keep it square when the pillow is stuffed in it. If I didn't have any seams, it might be really hard to get things lined up. So I'm going to knit it the way that it's written with some gauge differences, and then we'll see how it goes. So next week I'm planning on answering some questions that have been left in the comments of my videos over the past month or so. So if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer next week, please leave those down in the comments and let me know what you would like to know next week. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.